Hello, everybody, and welcome to Contributing Today. It's a very exciting episode here. We're going to be talking to two people who use tools that I use almost every day. So we'd love to hear your questions. This is going to be really quite interesting. Today, I'd like to point out that we have a lot of our episodes from past sessions online at Contributing.Today. Please join us in the Discord. We'd love to hear much of your Q&A as we go through here. And we also have our code of conduct, which you can see on the homepage there. So I'd like to start by introducing our first, both of our speakers. Our first speaker is Rebecca Stambler from Google, who works on the Go IDE team and works on VS Code and other things. And we have a second speaker coming up later on today, which is Sebastian van Stin, who will be talking to us about Docker and the Moby project. So first and foremost, Rebecca, how are you?
Good. Good. How are you? Hey. Good to be here. Excited to talk about editing Go code in VS Code.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm a big user of VS Code and the Go, obviously. I work a lot on Go at Microsoft. I've been using Go Please for a very long time, and it's one of my tools that I depend on for a lot of my work. I've even been using Go Please with the new, NeoVim, and it's
Oh, wow.
NeoVim Alpha and the language server capabilities that it has in there, which is quite cool as well. So it's fantastic.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'll talk about both VS Code and Vim and Emacs and all the other editors that we support. So
Yes.
yeah, one of the best things about it.
So just for a little bit of background, how long have you been working on the Go IDE side of things at Google?
So it's actually been the only job that I've ever had. So I basically was on the Go team at Google right out of college, and I've been there for almost 5 years now, which is kind of crazy. I spent my first 2 years or so working on internal tools, like for Go developers inside of Google.
Mhm.
And then I switched around, I think 2018 was when we first started working on Go Please and the Go language server. And so that's when I switched on working on things that for more open source community and for all Go users in general.
And I know that this ties in, so we've got to have Go Please, and we have VS Code and the Go extension, and the Go extension for VS Code was recently donated to the Go project as well, so it's now very much in line with Go Please. I imagine it's something we'll dig into as well, but
Yeah, for sure. It's been great having working with Microsoft, honestly, on getting the VS Code Go extension sort of owned by the Go projects that we're able to make kind of coordinated releases and changes and things that sort of apply to both the Go language server and the client, the biggest client of the Go language server.
one thing I've read that's really impressed me has been how much Go Please and the extension have improved leaps and bounds, like month over month. I'm appreciating the stability and the performance and all the other things that are happening. So it's just really fantastic. So thank you for all your work on that. It's really great.
Thank you. Yeah, we're excited that people are using it and enjoying it for sure.
So I'll let you take it away.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I have I have a presentation that's just sort of a brief 15-minute overview of what the Go language server and the VS Code Go extension are. Basically, just summarize what we've been talking about. And then I'll just take more questions after, and I'll do a quick demo as well. I'll just get started. That's basically my overview, and I think we already covered the about me part. Been working on this since 2018, and so when we talk about the Go language server, what do we actually mean? That's just kind of a term that might seem a bit strange. It's not any remote server. A lot of people often think that it's a remote server running somewhere else. It's just basically what the Go language server is a server that runs locally on your machine, and it communicates with your editor to provide IDE-like features to your editor. And so what do IDE-like features really mean? Well, some examples of features that the Go language server provides are things like, when you are writing code and you make a mistake, you get an error message, you get a little squiggly, the message. So that's something that the language server provides. Also things like auto completion. So as you're typing, you get auto completion with some documentation, as well as things like signature help, which is basically when you're typing the parameters to a function, you want to be able to get suggestions of what those parameters should be. And also when you hover over different variables and types, you want to get some documentation about those things. or an outline. So when you're coding, you get a little bit of an outline to the side of your code, see what other types and functions are declared in the file. So those are just a quick overview of features that the Go language server provides. And I'll show them in action in a little demo as well. So and to step back a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about the kind of current state of Go editors. So the language server is kind of a generic thing, and it can work in almost any editor. So if you're just getting started with Go, you may think, okay, the first thing I need to do is set up the environment that I'm coding in. And so when you have so you will need to pick a Go editor. And so there's a lot of popular free options, and they're all powered by the language server that I'm talking about. And the most popular one of those is VS Code, and we already mentioned Vim, as well as other editors like Emacs, and some less popular editors like Sublime or Atom. And then there's also some paid options which don't use the language server. And so the most popular paid editor for Goland for Go is Goland, which is an IDE. That's a JetBrains IDE. You can also use IntelliJ. But the Go team actually runs a survey, and one of the questions that we ask is, which editor do you use? And so VS Code is the most popular at 41%, but Goland is a close second at 35%, and then Vim and Emacs and the few other editors are slightly less popular, but also 14% of people are using Vim, so it is a fairly popular editor. So when I'm talking about editors later on, basically I'm referring to VS Code, Vim, Emacs, and those other free options that I mentioned, because these are the ones that use the language server that's provided by the Go team, whereas JetBrains has their own proprietary technology that they use to make Goland. And so I'll give a little bit more background on sort of the state of editors and the state of Go tooling and how we got to the place where we are working on a Go language server. And so just to step back kind of really far, in general, tooling has always been a really big selling point for Go, especially in its early days when Go was just coming out about like 10 years ago, even more now. People were really impressed with the kind of pioneering editor tooling that Go was providing. So, or just in general developer tooling. So, many of you if you use Go already, you're probably familiar with the Go command that makes it really easy to configure your environment and to build, test, and run your code. And so that's one piece of the developer tooling puzzle. But in addition to that, Go ships with a formatter. So when you get the Go command, you also get the go funct command, which is basically the standardized automatic formatter that comes with Go. And I think the quote is that go funct is nobody's favorite, but it's also everybody's favorite because it enforces a really strict standard on the way that Go code should look. But maybe it makes choices that you don't agree with. But it's so opinionated that it eliminates these arguments that people often waste time on, tabs versus spaces, etc. So that's been one really cool thing. And now I think it's really popular for all tools to have, formatters and import organization tools. But Go is kind of one of the more early languages that were adopting this kind of strict formatting requirements. And similarly with what I just mentioned, import modification, Go has a command called go imports, which basically will automatically add or remove imports in your program. And this is also a fairly new thing when it was coming out. And people really enjoyed using these tools and not having to manually manage their imports and remember import paths, but they could just get them automatically added to their files. So these kind of things were coming out in the very early days of Go, and people liked them and used them and started integrating them into their editor so they could, format their code as they were typing. And people began sort of building this ecosystem of editor extensions and plugins that would run these sort of command line tools as save hooks. And basically another thing about Go is that it's also really easy to write these tools because the Go standard library comes with a parser, an AST, and a type checker for Go itself. So it's really easy to write a tool that does something like jump to definition or rename a variable. And so that's what people started doing, is that people in the open source community were writing different tools that would perform functions that are useful for an editor. And so editors began to integrate these tools into them. So people were saying, okay, I want to be able to jump to the definition in my editor. So let me connect this Go def tool with my VS Code Go extension, and then I can jump to definition in the editor. And lots of people in the open source community, and Go has a really awesome community of developers that were interested in improving the experience. And so they started to add support for all these tools and these features. And we got a scenario where the VS Code, the editor would have a Go extension, and that Go extension would depend on lots of different command line tools. So as more tools got added, there were more features that were getting added. And basically you get a situation where you have this like large graph of things that the Go extension depends on. And each one of these tools is its own feature, and each tool has its own maintainer. So it became very difficult to manage, and it became difficult to have a nice coordinated release if one tool comes out at a different rate than the other. And it was difficult to debug problems and difficult to maintain all of this. So, and especially it became even more difficult if you throw in all of the different editors that people can possibly use. So Vim has its own plugin for Go, Emacs has its own. So it created a lot of complication in the ecosystem. And then, that maintenance burden would just continue growing on the Go open source community. And these plugins were, mostly community driven. So, and even more so, there was not really enough coordination between the Go team and the Go community on these plugins, because the Go team would often, there would be some incompatibility in a Go release, and then the Go team wouldn't chat with members of the community to say, hey, this is going to break this tool. And then all of a sudden the tool is broken, and a maintainer had to do a quick fix, and people would be complaining about their broken editor, and people would be afraid of upgrading to a new version of Go because they thought, okay, maybe my editor will break. So that created a really difficult scenario. And even more so when Go modules were released. So in Go 1.11, the Go team released a new dependency management system. And so when Go modules were released, excuse me, basically that was a further breaking change. And in addition, and not only did it break, a couple Go tools, it actually broke almost all of those tools that you saw in the previous slides. So that meant that we really needed to help out the community and make sure that we could rewrite all these tools and fix everyone's editor without causing too many problems. And so this is the point at which the Go tools team said, okay, we've got to help out with the Go community. We got to help improve the editor experience for Go, because we have all these awesome high quality tools, but the actual structure of the editor tooling and the support is not working well enough. And we could just go in and we could rewrite all of these tools, each one, and fix everything. But the fundamental process was a little bit broken. And so we thought, okay, let's restructure this so that we don't have to do this work every time we release something major. We can just do a lot of work once, and then things should be smooth from that point forward. And I think this was a pretty good decision, especially since after modules, we have generics coming up on the horizon now that the proposal for generics has been accepted. So our goal was to avoid doing a ton of work all the time and to avoid having to rewrite like 20 plus tools every time we had a major language change. So around this time is when we sort of became aware of LSP, or the language server protocol, which at the time was becoming slightly more popular and now has really become an industry standard. So if you really work with any editor, you probably know that you probably know about LSP, or that you probably are, or if you work with an editor like VS Code or Vim or Emacs, and you use pretty much any language at this point, you probably are using a language server, you just may not know it. So basically, the LSP is, let's quote directly from the LSP website. A language server is meant to provide language-specific smarts and communicate with development tools over a protocol that enables inter-process communication. So basically, the idea is to standardize a way that this language server will communicate with your editor, and this language server can be reused for any editor. So it doesn't just have to be for VS Code, it can be for Vim or Emacs or Sublime. And that means that the language team who's building Go language only has to write one language server, and it works for any editor. And it means that all an editor has to do is set up this basically be a language client and understand the language server protocol, and it will be able to like support any language. And so basically the idea behind it is to take this sort of complicated image and turn it into this one, so that these different features and all these different tools are part of the Go language server. So that's basically what we decided to do. We've decided to experiment with LSP and to see if it fit our needs and if it solved this problem for us. And that was around 2018. We released a prototype, I believe, in 2019, and people sort of off the bat were very interested in using it. One thing that comes with having a persistent server running locally is that it can have things like caching and just improved speed in general. So it was right away a lot faster than the previous tools, especially because modules had actually slowed things down a lot and made things a lot slower. And so we basically released this prototype. People were using it. We had a lot of interest in the community around it. And the language server is called Go Please. It's just Go plus LSP, the letters rearranged. But we thought it was kind of a fun name because, you could ask, Go Please define this variable or something like that. But basically, we had a lot of people that were interested in using Go Please and developing it and contributing to it. And an open source community member named Paul Jolly started organizing meetings or video calls where we were discussing new features and ideas. And we actually had some in-person summits at conferences in the before times. And in general, we have some communication over a Go Please Slack channel. So if you're interested in participating there. And I'll talk a bit more about how you can contribute in general later on. But basically, yeah, we had a lot of interest from the community and a lot of awesome features being contributed by community members. And people were getting really excited about it. And so we realized, okay, this is probably something that we should continue with and we should push forward. And so that's what we've been doing for the past few years. And our goal has been to reach a place where we could use the language server in any editor, and it wouldn't be, worse than the previous experience. It would be better. And so along the way, of course, we ran into some challenges. One, I think, early challenge, Aaron mentioned this when we were chatting, that Go Please has gotten a lot more stable lately. Basically, in the early days of Go Please, we really struggled with finding this balance of, okay, we want to add lots of new features and lots of cool new things with, okay, we need test coverage and we need to build up the infrastructure and we need to figure out the caching layer. And so finding that balance was really difficult at first when we were trying to, add tons of features and have that infrastructure. And so I think we took a step back in the last year or so and we said, okay, we want to focus on stability and we're going to sort of put features to the side. And I think we rewrote our caching layer about 4 times, but that's worked really well because contributors have really filled that gap for us. A lot of our contributions come directly from folks in the open source community who don't work for Google and who don't get paid to work on this, but who are interested and passionate about these things. And so it's been really great. Actually, like all of auto completion has basically been written by an open source contributor, and it's really awesome. I mentioned caching briefly, which was definitely a difficult part of it. One thing that's tricky in general is that since this is a local server that's running on a user's machine, it can be really constrained by whatever the memory capabilities of that machine are. So, we run into issues where people don't really have any RAM because they're, working on some remote server that doesn't have a lot of memory. And they'll, we have to strike this balance between being performant and actually having enough things cached so that we can answer quickly, but also, not destroying people's machines. And so, yeah, that's basically what we've been dealing with. And then another challenge has been just generally user engagement and helping users debug their setups and debug things that are going on, as well as, also dealing with our current work that we have. So we've been balancing how can we triage issues? How can we help someone whose editor is actively broken at this moment and is not able to code because something is broken versus how can we, drive forward the project and make forward progress? And also in general, investigating issues with Go Please is pretty difficult because everyone's environment is different, everyone's machine is different, their workspace, their setup, maybe they have a mono repo, maybe they have a different setup that we're not used to seeing, and it's difficult sometimes to reproduce bugs and to get logs for people. And I think, in addition, while this work has been going on, this work on the language server, we've also been focusing on our main client, which I also briefly mentioned in the beginning, is VS Code Go. The Go extension for VS Code is actually the main client of our of the language server. And so basically, one thing that we were focused on was how can we sort of streamline that integration between the language server and between the client. And so in June of 2020, the Go team sort of took ownership of the Go extension so we could help out with maintenance, so we could sort of smooth that integration. And so things that we've done is that we've been coordinating the releases with Go Please. So we're saying, okay, this change is going into Go Please. It'll go out through VS Code Go, a week later. We make sure that the timing is good. And then we also have, better integration testing. We're able to test things a little bit easier. And we also, one great thing that we've had is if the Go language server crashes, we can then have VS Code sort of recover gracefully and then maybe prompt the user to file a report with the crash log, which has been really, really helpful in helping us find bugs. So it's been great to have the VS Code Go extensions sort of collaborating more closely with us. And you can see the blog post announcement for that here, and I think it'll be linked elsewhere as well. And so finally, as of January 2021, we can say that the Go language server powers all Go extensions in all the major free editors. So in most of those editors had already transitioned. So Vim, Emacs, and other editors were already using Go Please for probably a year at this point. But we were waiting a while for VS Code specifically because we know it has a really large user base. And we wanted to be really careful to make sure that not only did the user experience not degrade and make sure that it was as good as it was before, we wanted to make sure that if something went wrong and if it wasn't working for whatever reason, a user would be able to have the resources to answer the question and figure out why things were going wrong. So we were really focused on sort of good error messages and good issue reporting. And so in 2021, we decided, okay, this is the time when we feel comfortable turning this on by default. And so now if you install the Go extension just straight out of the box, that's what you'll get is Go Please, the language server. And so that's the announcement for that. And basically, as we're continuing, the work is certainly not done. We are continuing to improve things. One major pain point that we've heard from our users is multi-module workspaces. So if you are familiar with Go, you'll know that typically the unit of a Go project is one Go module. That's your go.mod file. But a lot of times users will have multiple modules that they're working on simultaneously. And so we're trying to drive forward some improvements there. And what's really nice is the fact that the language server is tied so closely to the Go language itself, is that we're also going to be getting changes into the Go command itself to improve support for multi-module modules. So not only are these improvements coming to the editor, they're also coming to the Go command. And that'll probably be in 1.17 or 1.18. And we're also going to be continuing to improve the user experience. So we'll have tutorials, a workflow for creating a new module, because that's still not great. And we'll also be adding support for generics because those are coming up soon as well. I mentioned contributing to the extension. A lot of features have been contributed by open source folks, as I mentioned, and we have tons of feature requests open. So if you're interested in doing that, there's a guide on how to get started with contributing, and we encourage everyone who is interested in getting into open source. We have lots of small bugs that you can sort of pick up and try out if you're interested. But you don't have to just contribute with code. You can also contribute by testing out new features. So the VS Code Go nightly extension is the nightly build of the extension that happens, that's basically all the features that are a master. And so if you are interested in using that, you can file issue reports and say, okay, this feature seems to have broken in the nightly release. And that would be super helpful as well. And also Go Please has pre-releases before the actual release, which you can follow this Twitter bot for announcements of that, or you will automatically get pre-releases if you use the Go Nightly extension. So now I'll jump into, I'll jump into a quick demo or I can maybe I'll take a break to ask some questions, I guess, before demos, because I've been talking for a long time.
Fantastic. Yeah, so we've had some questions from the audience here. The first one is, when maintaining an extension for VS Code, how much contact, if any, do you have with the folks building VS Code itself?
I think the majority of our contact has actually been with the folks who maintain the language server protocol. And so, if most of our features go into the language server rather than the extension itself. And so we'll file an issue at the language server protocol repository. Occasionally we'll come up with a VS Code issue, but for the most part, it has been the LSP folks.
Fantastic. And another one here, how many Google peeps work on the extension versus community peeps? I think you spoke somewhat to that, but
I don't have a count of how many people from the community contribute. We actually, in all of our releases, will tag the folks who contributed to that release specifically. So I don't think that we have a specific number for that. But for the extension, we have a team of, I believe, 3 people are on the VS Code Go extension itself. And that includes debugging as well. So support for debugging is also part of that extension. It's not part of the language server. And for the language server, we have 4 people or so working on that. So pretty sizable team. Well, not, we can always use more people, but it's definitely a good number of people are working on it directly. And we have tons of people in the community that are contributing.
So when you say debugging, you probably work closely with the Delve project and all of that sort of thing. It's very, very tied into the extension, I guess.
Yeah, so I actually don't work on Delve at all, or really have much relationship with that. But Hana, who is the TL of the VS Code Go extension, works with them. And there's a kind of an active, basically there's something quite analogous to the language server protocol, which is the debug adapter protocol, DAP, which is, we're currently working on supporting that as well. So basically soon the VS Code Go extension will just be 2 different servers that are communicating over different protocols.
And another one here, for people who aren't familiar with the Go for Slack and so forth, is could you share the Go Please Slack channel in the Discord if you think it's valuable?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll share the link to that.
So for anybody who hasn't engaged with the Go community, we have a Go for Slack, which is very, very large. It's been there for a long time, and many different open source projects have their own channels inside of the Go for Slack, and it's used for all sorts of different things. And another one here, I'm wondering if the Go language server is written in Go.
Yes, it is. That's, I think I briefly alluded to this, but basically the Go standard library has all these awesome libraries for parsing and type checking Go code. So it makes it super easy to write tools in Go. So all of those tools that I was referring to earlier, those are all written in Go, and the language server is written in Go. So the only non-Go piece we have is the Go extension, which is in TypeScript.
And in terms of first-time contributors to Go Please, what are some of the best entry points for people who are keen to hack on it? So let's say I'm a Go developer, I have never hacked on a language server or anything else like that before, I find maybe a bug or something, or I start to get interested in it. Is there a kind of a smooth path to going from that to submitting something or debugging it myself?
Yeah, I believe so. We have actually a lot of people do tend to find bugs, especially if it's a bug in a feature, something like, okay, when I jump to definition, it goes to the wrong place. It's usually pretty easy to start diving in there and get a debugger going and see, okay, what's going wrong here? And you'll find, okay, maybe we don't handle type aliases correctly, or we don't handle embedded fields correctly. We actually, I think, just recently had a bug fix about type aliases, if I'm not mistaken, and from a new contributor. So something like that, it usually ends up being a pretty small, non-invasive change, and hopefully you can dive into the Go Please code base. Especially the feature logic is restricted to one package. I think it's golang.org xtools internal LSP source. And that's basically all the features, definition, hover, completion, all that stuff is in there. And so usually that's pretty straightforward for people. But if it's a little bit more of a complex issue, something like, okay, this, there's a lot of memory usage happening here, or when I open this package or something, that's a little bit trickier for even us to debug. And so that might not be a good point of contribution. But I think something like, there's a bug in a feature, or even just here's a new feature we want to support. Those are usually pretty good starting points for people. I think we've had folks who want to add support for, this is deprecated, so maybe we can mark it as, gray it out or something. Things like that are usually pretty good places for people to get started, though that one might be more complicated.
Yeah, that's one thing I really like about Go in general is I can be writing Go and I'm going into my own code and suddenly I'm stepping through the debugger and I'm in some networking part of the Go code and I can really start to understand, and you learn a lot just by going through and exploring things outside your immediate domain, which is really cool.
That's one of the great things about Go for sure, that it's always fairly readable.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'll let you continue on. Don't think we have any more questions right now, but I'm sure there'll be some more following up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I will quickly do a little demo, and then it's going to be approximately what I've shown before, but maybe it'll be a little bit more interesting to see it live. So hopefully I won't mess up. I don't think I'll be doing anything too crazy though. So let me just share my screen. So let me just make sure that this looks okay. All right, so here we have a so here we have just a really basic Go project. This is the module that it's in. So this is the go.mod file that I was mentioning. So when you create a Go module, you have to give it a module path. And this is actually, I'm reusing a demo that I did for another talk with another teammate of mine. So this is just that module. And one thing we can start off with is just looking at the go.mod file. And these are all, and you see these little code lenses. So these are all provided by Go Please. And so that's really nice because it helps you sort of work with your module without having to manually edit this file, which can be a bit confusing. So one thing right off the bat we can do is click this check for upgrades button, which I had already clicked before, which is why it was already highlighted. But basically it tells you if any of your dependencies have a new version. And so if we just hover over the blue error, actually maybe it'll be easier if I just pop up the problems. So you'll see that this blue squiggle is indicating that this dependency can be upgraded. And so Go Please will offer you a quick fix suggestion, say, okay, you can upgrade to this version. And we just do that and apply it, and right away we have upgraded. So that's a really nice feature. So you normally would have to do this on the command line, and you wouldn't be normally notified that there's an upgrade available. But here in your editor, you can just see it and cleanly edit this file. So now let's move over to the actual Go code. And so this logic is just basically a server that shows recipes in like markdown files. And so we can just kind of investigate the server. I'll show you just some of the basic things that I had already mentioned in the talk, which is things like, okay, if you hover over, you get a little bit of information, you get some documentation, and you can click on this link and it'll take you to the Go discovery site, which is basically a place to search for Go packages. And it'll take you to that package on the discovery site, which is helpful. And if you type, you can get some auto completion results, which give you some documentation there, and those are pretty useful. We have some more advanced features, so things like we have, if you just highlight this block of code, you can extract it to its own function, so that's pretty nice. And you get some generic name, but you can always rename it and say, okay, I can get address. And so that's a pretty nice feature to have right there. Then you have things like find references, which this one's pretty basic because it's a small project, but you would get references throughout your entire module. And some of the more advanced features of auto completion that we have, which actually were contributed by a contributor from the open source community, is what we call deep auto completion, which is basically it's going to search not just the top level symbols that are available to you, but all of their fields and methods and all the exported symbols of the packages that you import. So, in this example, we know that this address variable is supposed to be a string, right? So if we type address, we get string. And so if we do, try to reset the variable, we would expect that the auto completion results are strings. And we get that, but in addition to getting, the available strings in our workspace, we also get functions that return strings from different packages that we have already imported into the program. So that's kind of cool. And yeah, we also have something like we have callers and callees, so call hierarchy. So we can see, okay, this function is called from the main function. Similarly, we can do some more call hierarchy here, get a little bit more there. We also have, find implementations. I don't know if we have in find all implementations. Yeah, so we have, we can find the implementations of our HTTP response writer, which are not really, I think these are in the standard library or something. But yeah, so we have lots of different features that are available in the editor. And I can also demo more if there are more questions about the feature specifically. So I will stop sharing for now.
One other question I would ask was, what is the feature that you see people miss when they haven't been using maybe an IDE or maybe a extension language server and so forth, and they come to something like that for the first time? What are some of the things that people miss or that really light them up when they first start interacting with this?
I think, honestly, I would say completion is definitely, it's for the past few years, it's been the highest ranked. I think this year's Go developer survey, we asked what features people were like really interested to see improve and things that people care about. And completion is always the highest ranked one of those. And I think the reason behind that is that I guess completion can always get better, it could always be faster and always be more fancy. And so we actually are, working on ways to improve it. But yeah, I think I've seen a lot of people say that, they didn't think they needed completion and they got completion and they can't live without it anymore. Whereas, and actually, one feature I didn't demo, but I should demo actually, is workspace symbols. That's in my experience. I had never tried workspace symbols out before, and I didn't think I would need them, but now I cannot live without workspace symbols. And that's basically just if you, actually, I can quickly demo it right now. Let me just get my screen up. But it's basically, in VS Code, it's a little bit harder to find. So that's why I had never used it before. It's basically you do Control-Shift-P to get the command palette up, and then you type the hashtag, and then you can, look for, okay, like printf, right? And then you can just quickly go and jump there. And I find that so useful, especially when you're navigating a really big code base. It's so helpful. And even better, in VS Code, you can do symbols just in that file by typing the @ and so then you just get to every symbol in the file really quickly. And I find that so helpful in a large file.
Yeah, I remember when I first discovered that in another language, it was really, really handy. And I've obviously now used it occasionally in Go as well. Another one is I see a lot of people, if they haven't been debugging with the VS Code debugging tools, and they have all that when they first step through things or go run to cursor or use conditional breakpoints and all of that kind of stuff, that can really help track down certain issues and that kind of thing. Another interesting thing is it's amazing to see the development over such a long period of time and how far everything's come. The VS Code Go extension was actually the first extension inside of VS Code when it was first open sourced and launched on stage, and people decided they went with Go. It was a very interesting story how it came about. I should dig it up on the Twitter thread sometime, but it's very cool to see it all the way today.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was the first one. That's awesome.
Yeah, first outside of the actual editor itself. It's good JavaScript support and stuff.
Yeah, it's been around for a long time. I've basically I've been working on it for like years at this point, and I only know one file in that extension because it's got so much in there that I don't even know about, so many features that I hadn't even known about.
Yeah. I think it was the first demo when Scott Guthrie was demoing on stage. I should go back and like dig that up. It was really cool, but I've been using it that long. Yeah, fantastic. So if people have any other questions, we'd love to hear from the Discord here. I'm going to check out. Somebody says here 4.6 million installs of the VS Code Go extension. That must be intense.
Yeah, it's crazy. We have way more users than we were aware of, I think. And so it's been awesome though, because we get lots of feedback from people. The really great thing about it is if we release a bad version or something goes wrong, we're really aware of it instantly, I think, which is awesome, because not getting feedback is often scarier than getting it.
Yes.
So yeah, it's been awesome. And we've been trying to sort of engage with the community a bit more. We added a survey actually to the VS Code Go extension so that we could, get just information from users on what they're missing. Yeah, so basically it's been awesome to have that communication with the users.
So you have another question here. What is something that will not make it into the extension?
Well, I did mention debugging, so that well that is part of the extension, but it's I think a lot of things that we have usually sort of so yeah, so debugging is separate from the language server, but those two are basically together make the extension. But one thing that we will not usually or like contributions that we usually will not accept are things that are really specific to like a certain library. I think a lot of times people have their own testing framework or maybe a popular testing framework, and they'll say, okay, can you add this specific feature that really only works if you're using that testing framework? And we'll typically say maybe that's a good fit for another extension that is just for that testing framework if you're using it. So that's something we'll often do. But for the most part, any feature that benefits users will usually be accepted.
We have another one here. What do you particularly like about the Go community? What would you recommend folks start out using Go to check out first?
I mean, the Go community in general has been it's just a very welcoming, very open community with people that are really just genuinely excited and passionate. I think that's been really a really great part about working on Go, and that's why I've stuck around for so long. It's awesome to see people that get so excited, and especially the response to Go Please before. We really didn't expect people to get so excited and interested in it, but there were just so many folks that were ready to contribute, ready to just spend their time and be dedicated towards working on this thing that just to benefit other developers. So I think that's what I like about the Go community, is just the welcoming, passionate nature of it. And I think I'm people who are just getting started with Go. I think, I mean, I would always push Go Please, but also there's some things like the discovery site, which is recently open source. So basically, if you're interested in getting into the actual Go infrastructure, then you can just look at our Go project and say, okay, maybe that's a good place to contribute. Because when you actually contribute to the thing that you use daily, I think it makes it more fun for you to see your own changes then appear in front of you. And it's also very cool if you're into web development, that we have a space for that. If you're into IDEs, there's that. So, and also contributing to the standard library is a pretty fun thing as well, though a little bit more rigorous.
Yes, yes, that's something I aspire to one day. Definitely haven't got anything into the standard library today. Yeah.
I mean,
Another question here. Are there features from other language servers that you envy or would want to add?
that's a really good question.
I guess maybe in Go or outside Go.
Yeah, I think we've definitely looked at things like the Rust language server and the Python language server that we've been drawing from. I'm sort of drawing a blank on a specific feature that we've wanted to copy or borrow. But I will think about that. I can't, off the top of my head, I don't have one because we usually will look at them if we're wondering like, okay, how did they do this in Rust? How did they do this in Python? So that we can just sort of follow their lead because I think we're sort of going at the same time as them, but I think we just are always curious what the other folks are doing. But no, I don't have a specific feature off the top of my head that I'm aware of from a different language server.
Yeah, I'm
So
really
I think
impressed with
about
the
it.
work the folks on Pylance, our new Python language server, are doing, and it all built on top of the open source Pyrite, and it's this kind of stack of really amazing work that's being done. So it's great to see innovation in that area, and of course Rust with the Rust Analyzer and all of those kind of things. It's great to see.
Yeah, they're doing really awesome stuff, and it's cool to see all these language servers developed at the same time, kind of, and sort of the change in the ecosystem.
And is there a very tight coupling, sorry, between the language features that are coming down the pipeline, like generics and other things like that, and the language server? Does that sort of, you have to not really move mountains, but are these really big slices of things to work to cut off for you, or does that kind of go in parallel with the language developments as you go along?
Yeah, so I think one thing that we really did after modules was be really focused about, okay, we have to make sure that when generics comes, we have to have a plan for all of our tools. And so with generics, the nice thing about it is these changes they're going straight into the parsing and the type checking libraries. And so we get those changes for free. So when we get Go 118, we will also get the generics related changes. I think the biggest challenge for us will actually be, if you have a scenario where like, are using Go 117 for whatever reason, or Go 116 um, locally, but you're looking at generics code, and having that work seamlessly together is going to be tricky. And just making sure that basically, yeah, keeping the backwards compatibility with 117 and below, and making sure that things all work seamlessly and sort of build tagging out the parts of Go Please that are designed to handle generics. That part I think is going to be tricky, but everything else we will be getting for free kind of built in, which is the nice thing about Go Please.
And finally, for folks here who are new to a lot of this, where is the best place to get started with all this? I mean, I guess in VS Code, everything is somewhat automatic, but if I want to have a look at the project, if I want to reach out to folks working on it, some of the great entry points there.
Yeah, I think I would just start with the Go extension and downloading it, using it, and then we have basically documentation in both the VS Code Go repository and the Go Please repository. So if you want to take a look and just you're interested in contributing or something like that, we have docs for all of that. I believe the links should be shared with the folks who are listening. But yeah, so you'll be able to go straight to those links and sort of explore the documentation there. And we have details on the different settings that are available and how to get started contributing and things like that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you chatting today, and
thank you. That was awesome. Awesome being here. Thanks to everyone.
And next up, we'll be talking to Sebastian. Hi, Sebastian.
Hi, welcome. So, yeah.
You work on another one of my favorite tools, Docker.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
I use this a lot. I containerize my Go code. I containerize my Python code, my Rust code, my other things. It's been one of my very big focuses here, particularly in the open source projects that I work on. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how did you get started with this? Maybe that's a longer story, but
oh wow!
How long have you been working Docker and on the Moby project?
I've been working at Docker since 2015. I've been a contributor to the Docker project since 2013. Basically, it came, I don't know, Docker got in the news as to there's this awesome new tool, and I was super interested as to what is this and how does it work, and it sounded interesting, and there wasn't a lot of information out there yet. So then you go looking at where it's built. So I went to GitHub, had a look at the repository and didn't understand anything about it. And basically started reading along. So I started following pull requests to see what's coming up, what are they working on. Started looking at issues that were opened and people asking questions or reporting bugs. And basically along the way, I learned how it worked and got more and more interested. And at some point, I started giving back as to I knew answers to questions people had. Or at some point, it's like, okay, it's scary because it's a big project, right? And so I started commenting on pull requests whenever I saw something that I thought, oh, maybe I have some input on this. And that's basically how it all got started, as to just start participating. And it was a fun ride, absolutely, to get there and see the projects grow and become massive at some point. Yes.
Yeah.
So
and that's a great word. That's a good entry point regarding commenting on pull requests. Like sometimes just engaging and starting to probe and understand things. It's a really good entry point. I know one of Dave Cheney's favorite sayings is talk first, then code. And a lot of us want to sort of go into the pull request and say, hey, I fixed the thing, and then show up with the code.
It's a lot of things. I mean, I have some older slides as well in my stack, but it's basically, many people think that contributing to a project means you have to code and you need to have an editor and understand how it works. And there's so much more than that. It is, if you open a bug report, if you help someone get the right information about that bug report, if it is, I mean, the standard example is writing docs. Of course, that's always important, but it's not always even writing the docs, or it could be just commenting as to, hey, here's my use case, and I tried doing this with your project, and it didn't work. And I have a very interesting use case, and it helps the maintainers get a better understanding as to, hey, these are things we never thought about. And that's definitely something we saw with Docker. There's so many things that people did with it that no one thought about when it was created. That's super interesting because the more information you get, the more you are able to design around that and try to facilitate that. And things go in completely different directions than you expected when you started it. And Yes, so absolutely. Contributing to a project, an open source project, can go in many, many ways. It's not just all code, it is helping others, participating in the community, whatnot. And yeah, I think that's always welcome. But what many people not always realize is that a big project ultimately ends up on a few people that maintain the project. And the amount of users is so much bigger than the amount of maintainers. And even with their best effort, it's almost impossible to deal with everything. And
That's one of the
yeah,
hard things. And I think when people go into open source, they don't understand it's this wave. You get these users out of seemingly ether, and they come along and they all have the demands, and it's really this expectation management thing with the community, and
you grow a thick skin, but at some point, someone commenting, "Why is this fixed? It has been open for 2 years," and it's like, yes, we know. Some of them, some of them, it's difficult. Some of them, yes, I can understand your use case, but looking at the amount of people that are using it, it's such a small minority that is running into this. So it is not the top priority for us. And there's only 24 hours in a day, and that's not always enough to maintain things.
And one other small question I'll ask before we continue on. When you started to do code contributions in Go, did you know Go well before working with Docker, or did you learn Go to
Absolutely
do
not.
Docker?
It was completely new for me. Yeah. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the tools. So the underlying things of Docker itself was completely new to me. So I learned along with the project. And it was, yeah, so I think that's also one of the reasons I mentioned that later on as well. It was one of the reasons that the project chose Go, because it's quite an easy stepping stone to get into.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a foreign language to many people, but it is quite understandable, and it's not a complex language. So it is, at least for the basics, it's easy to get into, which is great for an open source project, because you get people from all kind of backgrounds, and especially for some things, you can ask them out, you can contribute the feature, and we can guide them through getting to know the language better. But it's definitely an option. Yeah.
And it's a very welcoming community from people with different language backgrounds. Everybody's coming from a different background. It might be Java, it might be Python, it might be something, but it's all easy to ramp up, and everybody can kind of land on the same thing and get contributing quickly. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Well, with that, I'll let you take it away. And
yeah, so I have a few slides. I don't have that many. Let me try sharing. Okay, so I thought it's about Go. So let me start with Docker and the Moby project. Docker is probably well known to most people. A bit about me. So before I was working on Docker, I was a PHP developer, something completely different, full stack and backend engineer. And as I just mentioned, so around 2013, I started contributing to the project, getting to know the project, and currently I am a maintainer for Moby and Docker open source projects. I'm a reviewer on Containerd, which is the runtime we use. And well, just about any repository I can get my hands on, I'm everywhere. Since 2015, I'm a software engineer at Docker. So they asked me to do the things I was doing full time, and that was fun. So what is the Moby project? So the Moby project, some people may know, at some point the Docker repository was renamed to Moby. This was part of an effort to split the products that Docker delivers from the open source project. And basically it is an upstream open source project that is used for the Docker products. And Currently in the Moby project, there's a couple of projects. So we have the Docker engine. So that's the Moby main repository. And there's also BuildKit in there. And that's the engine that is used when you run Docker builds to build your images. It can be either used standalone, but it's also used to drive Docker build itself. And there's a couple of libraries and other projects in there. The goal we have with the Moby project ultimately is to dismantle the Docker engine. That sounds odd, but it started as just Docker, and it grew and grew in features. And at some point, we split off the runtime, which became libcontainer and later containerd. Runc also originated from the parts we had. And now there's the Docker engine and the CLI, which are now separate projects. And basically make it more components, smaller components that provide a specific goal. That's still an ongoing process, so things will still be moving around and be split off or moved to separate repositories. So Golang, or Go. So Docker was originally written in Python, and at some point the decision was made to switch to Go. And we were pretty early adopters, I think. It was pre 1.0. Things were still a bit rough around the edges. And we were building Go from source at the time. And it's very specific needs because of the way we were using Golang. Sometimes in ways it wasn't really designed for or was never thought of that it would be used for. So usually with every release, we would hit some interesting corner cases and found some bugs. But things became more and more stable, and that was great. Originally, there was no dependency management, really. No vendoring. It was all a bit do it yourself and get things set up. And that became a lot better over the years. Reason we chose Go, it was easy to ship for us. We could build static binaries, and at the time, Docker was a single binary. And we could easily build those and ship those without having to do Debian or RPM packages and all complexity needed for that. So things changed over the years. It's now no longer that important for us to have the static binaries, but it really got us bootstrapped and helped us, at least at the start. Go provides an extensive set of tools, which were already mentioned by the previous talk. It's just, you have Go and you have all the tools you need, basically. You have a test framework, and especially things like Go format are just perfect for an open source project, where you have many contributors and there's no discussion about, could you format this slightly different because that's the way we work. It helps a lot of discussions that would otherwise have stalled the contributions. And well, it's cross-platform, and that's pretty awesome now, because we never thought that Docker, for example, would be running on Windows. I think the original README even had it's working on Linux and probably never will run on anything else. Complexity in our project. So dependency management is still quite complex in our case, and I think in many bigger projects. We now have Go modules, which is a big improvement, although the Moby project still hasn't migrated to that. We have some hurdles to take there. It can make your life easier, but there are still some pitfalls to be aware of when you're using Go modules, but also dependency management in general. Fun things if you have a big project and a lot of dependencies and other things is that a single line of code can have a huge impact on your dependency tree. A fun example was just the other week, I think, where a single test utility was used in a dependency we had and Containerd had, and just removing that one utility, well, got rid of 400,000 lines of code, which is a big saver, of course, but it makes it clear how easy it is to get a whole dependency tree added to your project. And sometimes it can be difficult to find out actually why is this dependency in there, especially if there's some complexities. In Containerd, we had some circular dependencies, which is always fun. There's Go tools. Sometimes it's just scrapping for whatever is causing this dependency to be added. It's also important to review your dependencies. It's very easy to forget that even though it's very easy to add your dependencies, that it's still code that you are shipping. So basically dependencies become your code. You are shipping a binary that includes the code that you vendor or get through a module. And even though Go modules hide those dependencies, which makes it a lot cleaner, you still should have a look at what code are you bringing in. Have a good understanding of the dependency you have and why you're using it. Also to reduce what you're using, but especially if there's changes in the dependency you're pulling in that might be problematic. Be aware that something I recently saw that tagged isn't always tagged, which was a minor issue. If you're browsing this, then you think there's a version 0.2, but it turned out to be a branch that I tried to get, and there's no actual tag corresponding to that. So it shows that sometimes the tooling is nice, but also always be sure to verify whatever you're pulling in. Another thing to be aware of if you're using Go modules, replace rules can be a big burden. In some cases, so this is an example in Containerd, some dependencies turned out to be not compatible and caused some very odd issues. So they had to pin to older versions in a replace rule. And if you're using Go modules, those replace rules will not be taken into account if you vendor this module. And yes, Semver is hard. Don't always take the version for granted. Even though the project maintainer tries to do the best thing, a minor change in a project can be a breaking change for you, and that is not always directly apparent. That's things we learned over the years. Sometimes there's a bug in some code path that is very hard to find, and it doesn't break immediately. If it would, that would be a lot better. So if you are maintaining a project on your own and you open sourcing it, make sure to set the expectations right. The thing that's great with Go is that it's very easy to use someone else's code, which may be your code. But maybe you didn't anticipate this. You just started a fun project and all of a sudden the whole world is depending on it. So whenever you open source something, make sure to set the expectations right. Set the scope of your project. So this is what I'm going to be doing with this project. Maybe it's just a fun project. Put it in the README. Also clarify what the stability is of your project. As to maybe you're just playing around and no guarantees whatsoever. But it may also be that there's some packages in your project that are never intended for external consumption. You can make them internal, which is not always nice to do. Some people may still want to use them. But it's at least good to call out as to these part of my projects are for my own use, don't rely on them. And if you want to have some form of stability, sometimes using deprecated comments which show up in all good editors, and use aliases to help the migration for consumers of your project. And of course, never forget the legal stuff. Pick the right license. Don't just pick the first license you think. Have a good look at which one is right for you. Also, make sure to apply the correct way. It's not always obvious, and many projects, including some that I maintain, do it the wrong way. For example, if you have the license, don't get tempted to fill in these blanks, because the license itself is just an example how to apply it to your code, which means copy this section and put it in your source code. It's also important to know who owns the copyright, because you started this project, you get contributions, and realize that you don't become the copyright owner of that code. Those people are still, in most cases, still owner of the copyright. And you may require something like a DCO check for them before you accept their contributions if you want to be covered legally. So those are just some things. There's a lot I can tell about the project. Maybe it's time for questions and see whatever comes up. And I can tell more about contributing or about the project itself if people are interested. Let me see. I see there's some questions. Let me see where we go.
Excellent. So we have our first question here. I see lots of open issues for the Moby project. How and who triages this?
That's a good question. We try to triage them. The point is revisiting the ones that are still there. There's a lot of bugs we get reported that are very hard to reproduce or very specific to use cases, so that may need more information. And we've been debating whether or not we should automatically close all stale issues or do so manually. And that's still under debate. Maybe we want to automatically close all the issues, but keep feature requests open for further discussion. Sometimes we leave feature requests open because the feature request may be there, but we want to get more use cases to get a better understanding as to what is the feature request, who does benefit from this, and can we make this change? Also to give the opportunity for people to participate on the discussion on that and maybe design a new feature around it.
See a comment here. I don't think I ever heard fun example and dependency management mentioned in one sentence.
It can be a lot of fun. Yeah, so one fun story as well was at some point we had a dependency where we thought it was a tag that we vendored, and it turned out to be a branch that was named after a tag name. And at some point, so we had our own vendoring tool, and that all works. And then all of a sudden, it turned out that the code changed, and it was like, what is happening here? And it turned out we were relying on a branch that was not a fixed version of the dependency.
That's a really important call out. That's something that probably would sideswipe me today if that so happened on a large project. That's amazing.
So that was also my test. So the thing I linked, so it is in the slides. For fun, I created a module and created a branch that was valid Semver, or at least the format was, and then did a go get, and all of a sudden I saw a new release appear on package.go.dev without even tagging. So don't create a branch that is Semver because someone can pull it and now you did a new release. Which may be tricky and not what you expected to happen. So in our project, we still use vendoring. it has a couple of reasons. I know there's people against and people for it. It saved our behind a couple of times with dependencies going AWOL, or also in situations where we had to build security releases and we had the code and needed the vendoring to apply some hot patches. But it is a lot of fun with dependency management. And it can be opening a can of worms. And at times I find myself opening pull requests in 10 or 20 repositories to get my dependency tree right. So yeah, so you will find me and many of the other maintainers in many repositories to get the things right, to get it working best for us.
So you'll even go beyond what you'll go to other repositories that somebody may be depending on and saying, hey, we need to go over here and fix this, or make sure this is in line before we can depend on it, and so forth.
Yes. We frequently have a look as to, so what do we use this dependency for? And at some point you find that there's a lot of things being brought in because of that dependency. Now you may have a choice as to either we're going to be forking this or we're going to be copying the code, which is awkward because now we have to maintain it on 2 places. Sometimes it's okay. I mean, if you have a very small bit of code, it is sometimes easier to repeat yourself instead of having a very complex dependency tree. Many times, have a look at the upstream. Maybe they are open to doing some refactoring if it's in a compatible way. Sometimes it's just moving one utility to a different package, and it can help you a lot in getting things in a better shape.
We have another question here. The contributors guide is quite extensive, and while that's great, what's the TLDR? I mean, I would advise everybody to read the whole contributors guide. Is there a summary?
It really depends. So the TLDR is that it absolutely need a cleanup as well, the contributors guide. So the TLDR is, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for understanding the code, my usual way is to start from the API. I know what API endpoints are called for a specific action. As to if I start a container or create a container, I can find my way back from the API. So I find the endpoint that in the API that's being used, and from that, with great help from my IDE or any IDE that's a bit smart, you can find back as to what's the path that's being followed. I must admit, I mean, Docker is a complex thing, and it evolved over the years, so code has been moved around at a lot of occasions. So sometimes it's just follow the code path as to where things are done. Yeah, what's the TLDR on contributing? So in general, if it's a bug fix, so as the policies we follow, if it's a bug fix, we don't always require an issue to be opened first. It depends. It may be there's an existing issue, which is great with reproducer. It could be that you found a bug that is pretty obvious, in which case just open a pull request. That's usually fine. If possible, especially in some parts of the code where we know it is dangerous to make changes, there's some pretty complex parts. Yeah, we need a reproducer, and we need to have a way to verify that it works and it doesn't cause a regression.
And I'm guessing that'd be across operating systems too. So you might have to go test something on Windows and have a particular version and test it across different versions and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we have in our CI, we have a couple of distros that we run on. We make extensive use of Docker itself as well, because all our tests run Docker in Docker, and we build in the Docker file. So it is really Russian dolls there. But things can indeed be complex, especially with a lot of diversity in all the kinds of distros that are out there, and sometimes difficult to find the issue. But yeah, it depends. So I don't have a clear one-cut answer as to what is it the TLDR. I don't think there is one. Yeah.
So they can read the contributor guide and maybe send a pull request to it if they have ideas of how to make it cleaner.
Yes.
Fantastic. So tell us about github.com/moby/projects. Are you planning development in the open?
Sorry, it was.
And this is this. Let me just pull this up on my screen. I don't know if I'll share it.
Projects.
It's the project board on the Moby projects, and I see 5 open. Planning, I see bug regressions, 20.10 planning, improving CI.
Oh, right. Usually we use those. So we have a weekly maintainers meeting, and often we create ad hoc boards if we want to be tracking things. For example, we had some regressions we had in 2010 that we tried to keep track of. There were some plans to, and that's still also ongoing, to move more parts of the engine to Containerd, for which we have a project. Most of those things are used by the maintainers just for ad hoc project planning or ad hoc work that's in progress.
And another question, do you help folks make contributions, like with office hours or a community IRC, Slack, Discord, or Clubhouse?
We do have our Slack channel. We mostly don't use Discord or other things. There are, it's being used for some community meetings that are being organized by Docker. Not the core maintainers don't use it too often. But yeah, go to the Docker Slack if you have questions. There is a Moby projects channel there as well that you are welcome to ask questions or send me a DM. I try to follow up on those.
I was actually fascinated. I only learned recently that the team working on .NET actually does all on the runtime itself, does all of their pull requests in the open and all of their code reviews. So you can go and see video code reviews of PS the runtime, which is quite cool. And looking around at projects that have similar workflows where you can go maybe ask questions or not, but it's great to see people at work on these kind of things.
Okay.
Yeah. Another question here, starting with early versions of Go, even the sources, did you ever doubt the decision to go for Go and consider other options?
So I think the parts that I think maybe should have been better in something else was maybe the really low-level stuff. So Run C currently is written in Go, may have benefited from other languages. I think for the project itself, I'm pretty happy with Go. Sure, there are other options now. I mean, Rust has taken off a lot, but it really worked for us to use Go. And I don't see us switching to anything else. But it could be that there's parts of our code that we use or certain components that may be written in different languages. I know the Docker desktop team has some OCaml stuff in there, and there's a bunch of Swift code that's being used there for things. So yeah, it's not all Go, but most of the runtime CLI will pretty much stay in Go. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, you mentioned Rust there. I have colleagues who work on Rust, and I work a lot in the Go community as well. And I find them to be very complementary in many ways. And there's a really good blog post by Steve Francier on the Go team and Jonathan Turner, who until recently was working at Microsoft, and he works on projects like New Shell and others in the Rust community. And they talk about the complementary aspects and certain overlap and other things, but it's really not an and an or. You see a number of projects using Go for a large chunk of things, and then using Rust for the low level and the places where you get that advantage of maybe not having a runtime or something like that. So it's always fascinating to see how those come together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think both all of those languages have their own benefits and downsides. And I think if you have a project set up, you would have to have a pretty compelling case to switch to something completely different and consider what the benefits would be for your project.
And it's also where the center of gravity of a community is. You know, cloud community in particular, it's very much leaning towards Go, and it makes it very easy for people to be, you know, to contribute, to be speaking the same language, reason about things, and we have this fantastically robust tool chain, you know, in so many areas, because we've all been building these systems for quite a while now. So it's quite good. And in terms of contributions, what are some of the ways that you would encourage people to contribute to the project? What are some of the best entry points that you find? And if you're somebody who maybe wants to contribute, where would you start? Either from, you know, non-code contribution all the way to, you know, in the core of you know, Docker there.
I think non-code contributions would definitely be being able to reproduce bugs. There are some bugs that we are sure there's something lurking somewhere, but to get to the root of it is very complicated and maybe very dependent on the environment in which someone is running or something in their setup. So yeah, if you have a way to reproduce things, that definitely would help. Other ways to contribute, well, you mentioned triage already. There may be bug reports that have gone unnoticed or have gone stale, and yeah, that never hurts. Code review also never hurts. I think it's not always clear to people that code review should also be open to anyone. If you have something to contribute to a review, you're always welcome to leave your comment, and maybe at some point you become a maintainer, or maybe some people notice you the way I got into the project, and I think, hey, this is a valuable contributor. So that always works. Yeah, I think that's it, just from the top of my head. Yeah.
Do we have another demo upcoming for this session? Do you have an extra demo?
No, I don't have a demo.
Fantastic. Good. So
no.
we've got plenty more time Q&A.
Yeah.
For as long as we have. Excellent. So let's see if we have any more folks in the Discord. Dun, 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 dun. So somebody is mentioning the Docker community Slack. If we want to join that, it's at the dockercommunity.slack.com. I believe I'm in that one. And the Moby channel.
Yes. Let me see. There it is. Oop. I think I have in my slide. So there's the community Slack channel. We have forums. But if you want to interact with the community and maintainers or people at Docker, the Slack channel is usually best. And as I said, you can always send me a DM or one of the other maintainers. That's always open to anyone.
And I'll put you on the spot here as one of the first large most well-known consumers of Go language, and very much responsible for popularizing in a way at a very critical time. What are some of the things that you would like to see? What are you looking forward to, maybe in terms of language features? I don't know if you're going to run it there and start using things like generics straight away, or maybe appreciating some of the others that are in the pipeline, or language tooling, because you had Rebecca on just before. Do you have a wish list? Do you have things you really appreciate, or things that you're looking forward to?
The thing I personally am still looking for, and I should be opening a request for that, is to fix Go modules for our projects. At some point, it was decided to switch to Calver for tagging the releases. And in the past, we always tagged releases for the binaries and never for Go compatibility. And Go modules for us claimed the existing tags to be considered a Semver release for the Go code. which was never the case. But now people run into issues because it doesn't understand the calvert tags, and it tries to prefer the old Semver-ish tags. So we need to find a solution for that. We have been looking for using submodules, which is not really easy to use. But we want to move to Go modules at some point. Currently, it is complex to get it done. Yeah,
it seems like it's a big chunk. Fantastic. Yeah. So, and as we're sort of wrapping up here, do you have any famous last words and any other upcoming events, live streams, events, things related to Docker in particular? I know you have a conference which is rather large as well on the horizon.
Yes, I put the slides up. We have DockerCon. Registration is open and it's free. So if you're interested in Docker, absolutely join. And they're hiring. And I think in my team as well, may not be up yet, but there's a couple of positions open and it's all remote now and in various countries.
And this is remote worldwide. So it's remote in these countries, but it's not just remote if you're in this city in the US, which is really fantastic.
Right, so it is some countries because of legal reasons. So we have entities in those. So those are the countries we can hire. Otherwise, it's fully remote. So yes.
Fantastic. And let's have a look here. Any more questions from the Slack? Thank you very much for joining us. This has been fantastic. How do we find you? I see your Twitter handle on the video stream here. What else do you use? We'll find you on GitHub, find you on Twitter.
Find me on Twitter, on GitHub, and on the community Slack. I think that's probably the best way to contact me. You can send me an email as well. My email address is there. I get a ton of email, so at times it may take some while for me to respond, but I'll definitely read or open the ticket.
Tag your attention. That's one thing I like about Twitter. It's often that very low frequency, that low latency thing. You can just drop somebody a DM and it usually gets them sometimes faster than email.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Pretty fantastic. Well, thank you very much. It's been absolutely fascinating, and thank you also to Rebecca as well who's joined us today, and appreciate everybody watching along.
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. Join us next week for a meetup and on funding and sponsoring and open source. That will be on April 7th at the same time, 8 p.m. CET.